Go inside the Crimson Tide with your hosts Rodney Orr and Gary Harris, keeping you informed on everything Alabama. Tider Insider TV, brought to you by Visit Tuscaloosa.
And good evening, everybody. Welcome into the latest edition of Tider Insider TV, presented by Visit Tuscaloosa. Find out more at visittuscaloosa.com. I was commenting to Rodney before the show. We've been doing this a long time. These Tuesday nights, it's just amazing how fast they come. And before you know it, it'll be the Tuesday night before the opening game against Florida State.
Well, I took a picture on the outside there, posted on Facebook, Saban Field. It'll be here before you know it.
It will be. It really will be. All right, as always, we had a great edition of Tider Insider TV. Alongside Rodney Orr, I am Gary Harris. This past Friday, a huge story. It finally came to fruition. The House versus NCAA antitrust settlement was approved by a judge, opening the door for millions of dollars to be shared between schools and student athletes. Universities and colleges will have $20.5 million to share per year for athletes across all of their sports. Over $2.7 billion will be paid out to former athletes who played before the NIL era. That's interesting. That's the House part of the settlement. House, a former athlete at Arizona State, brought the lawsuit. And NIL deals over $600 will have to be approved by an outside organization. I don't know how in the heck that's going to work. Alabama's Director of Athletics, Greg Burns, says the university has been planning for this and described the changes as much needed. Yay, Alabama, the university's NIL collective, will now, for the most part, become a content and information site and won't be soliciting money the same way they have in the past. All right, let me bring Rodney in here. We're not going to spend a ton of time on this because, quite frankly, as I said on my radio show this week, I still don't really understand how it's going to work. It's going to be implemented July the 1st, but we do know this. It's going to change fundamentally, at least, and structurally, the way NIL is done.
Yeah, and I think, too, Gary, it's like you said, a lot of people have been wondering, is anything happening? Well, I think, yeah, obviously it has been happening, and this is something that I think, when you look at it, I'm not sure it's a finished product, but I think it's at least a really good start to where we're moving forward, because I think you have to put something in place. And again, there's going to potentially be lawsuits. We know that would challenge some of the things that are involved in this settlement. But I think, Gary, it's a start, and I think that's the most important thing.
Yeah, where it gets a little sticky. First of all, for some of these athletes in some of the Olympic sports or so-called minor sports, it's going to be a boon for them. Some of these athletes, student athletes, aren't getting paid. They're now going to get guaranteed money. Now, the majority of this money is going to go to football and men's basketball. That's just the reality of it. But it will go to all sports. So for some student athletes, you're going to be like, this is great. But there's going to be a commission in place. And as we said, anything over $600 outside of that money that you're paid directly by the college or the university to you has to be approved. I don't know how in the world they're going to do that. I guess we'll find out. But I know this. If you've got a quarterback at any school that's making $4 or $5 million, or has made that in the last year or so from so-called NIL, pay for play, and then all of a sudden the school says we're going to pay you $2 million directly, they're not going to accept getting $2 million less than they were making their agent, the people that handle them, without a fight. So, as you said, there's going to be some pushback to this, I have no doubt.
Yeah, I think it's pretty clear. There's going to be some real challenges to this. But with that said, again, I think that's kind of what you have to do. You have to take that first step. And now we'll see what happens as this kind of evolves. But I go back to what I said. I really think the promising thing is that it is a start.
And promising thing, too, is that maybe NIL really will be NIL. Because according to an article in USA Today, the commission will look at data to determine if the deal has actual business value and if the player is being paid a fair amount for their services. In other words, what they're trying to say is over what you're paid by the university. NIL has to be for NIL. In other words, it has to be legitimate.
Yeah, and again, I think that's where some of the confusion is going to come in, Gary. And again, we could sit here and talk about it all night long, but we're just going to have to kind of see how it evolves.
All right, July the 1st, though, will be here very soon, and those payments will start taking place. All right, now it's time for Coach Talk. The SEC held its spring meetings a couple of weeks ago down in Destin, and that was before the House settlement was approved. Still, Alabama head football coach Kalen DeBoer said that college coaches have an understanding of what the new landscape will look like, or did have an understanding of what it would look like with the revenue sharing. But DeBoer admitted he didn't have a clear vision of what roster building would look like under the new rules and guidelines.
believe still a lot of those guys that were walk-ons actually have their name in the portal because they have to be able to adjust. And we've fortunately got some guys that really want to be at Alabama in those walk-on roles, and if the roster size was reduced, they and we would have to adjust accordingly there also. Those conversations are tricky when you don't know the parameters you're playing with.
All right, Rod, let's follow up on that. Roster limits sizes will be increased, but the question about walk-ons is a real one because most of the players that are on the team are going to be on scholarship. Will there be walk-ons going forward? How do you think this is going to work?
I think we're seeing the end of that. It's going to phase out. I think where we are right now, yes, we'll still have some for this year. After this, I'm not really sure what direction that's going to go, but I think we're phasing out of that where we'll have up to 105. Now, I know the SEC this year is still limiting it to 85 scholarships, but here's the thing, Gary. When you have $20.5 million and you're going to spread it out, and the way you divvy it up, I'm thinking that your roster, where we've seen 85, I think you're going to see that potentially decrease because that's more money you can pay your top 70 players versus if you have 85 or whatever it is on scholarship. So we could actually see the numbers go down a little bit.
Yeah. I said earlier that Olympic sports would be helped by this because it guarantees that they're going to get some type of payment. At the same time, because they're not considered revenue sports over the long haul, this could impact them negatively. We will just have to see. All right, let's move on. Alabama baseball had a really good season. We know that. Won over 40 games for the first time since 2002. Very competitive in the SEC. Won 17 games total, counting the tournament. Went to a regional, but then they sputtered. They went to Hattiesburg and lost to Miami, lost to Southern Miss, and they were done, just like last year, 2 and done. Now you start having to reshape your roster. According to a report, Justin LeBron will return. That is big, if indeed that comes to fruition, and I believe it will. But you're having to go to the portal, Rodney, and they're bringing in Brennan Holt, an infielder from South Alabama. Good-looking player, started at LSU, went to Oklahoma State, then to South Alabama, now to Alabama. Justin Osterhaus out of Purdue-Fort Wayne is a guy who can play everywhere. Mainly played second base, but he can play the outfield. He's a jack of all trades, really good hitter. And then they're bringing in a couple of pitchers, and there'll be more to come. Matthew Tippie, a right-handed pitcher, is coming in from Texas State, where he had a really solid year. And then Caden Humphrey, another right-hander, coming in from North Florida. So, Rodney, as Alabama tries to, quote-unquote, take it to the next level, I think it's important that the players, and it's just hard to gauge right now, but the players you lose in the portal, the players that you bring in need to be better than the ones you lose. That's pretty simple.
No doubt.
Yeah.
And we talked about this last week, things that Alabama needed to kind of beef up. And we talked about hitting. They're bringing in 2 guys that we think can add a punch to the lineup. But also, Gary, pitching depth, the bullpen. I think that's been kind of an area where you hope to improve that as you move towards next year. And it looks like with the additions that they will.
Yeah, really excited about Osterhaus. Yeah. That was him making that catch where he went over the fence. But all of these guys. But again, Alabama's got a good nucleus, particularly if LeBron comes back. But they will be losing Will Hodo, who was just a dynamic hitter for them, and some other guys. But you mentioned pitching depth. That's going to be a key. I think when you look back at this past season, to me, the biggest weakness was, first of all, I think they were a starter short for 3-game weekend SEC series. And then overall, they really primarily leaned on 6 or 7 pitches total. That's not very many over the course of a 60-game season.
And I think that's why these additions are really important.
All right, we're going to keep it moving on. Still to come on TITV, Alabama football wrapped up another big recruiting weekend. This guy's got all the info. And speaking of the recruiting weekend, it led to a commitment from a massive offensive lineman out of Orange, California. I call him an interior offensive lineman, but he also has the athleticism possibly to play outside at tackle. We'll have the latest on Sam Utu's commitment next, and a little bit later on we'll be getting to your phone calls. And again, I know we're kind of getting into that summer lull, but where have all our phone callers gone? The last couple of weeks phone calls have been slow. We'd love to hear from you. 205-348-WVUA. That's 348-9882. There's the email address on your screen. You can send us an email as well. We'll be right back with the only show that takes you inside the Crimson Tide, Tider Insider TV. And welcome back to TITV, presented by Visit Tuscaloosa. Alongside Rodney Orr, I'm Gary Harris. All right, recruiting. Stay with me on this one. This is just off you know how I am, off the top of my head, because I've been fishing a couple times lately. After I haven't gone fishing for years, went with Tommy Wilcox a couple times. Recruiting's a lot like fishing. You go fishing, you enjoy the process, but you want it to be about catching. You know what I mean? Right. Yeah. After a while, if you're just fishing, you get tired unless you're doing some catching. Recruiting is kind of the same thing. You recruit, and you want to reel them in. And that happened after another big weekend in Tuscaloosa this past weekend. 4-star offensive lineman Sam Utu committed to the Crimson Tide. The recruiting experts kind of already had predicted this. Rodney went out on his board and said, "Hey, it's going to happen." Big guy. 6'4", like 330 pounds, 328, somewhere in that range. He is ranked as the number 11 interior offensive lineman in the class, according to 247 Sports. But he has the ability to play tackle as well because he's so versatile and athletic. Had a lot of offers, Rodney, but he pretty much said going into the visit that Alabama was going to probably be the school. Then afterwards, he went ahead and shut it down.
You know, he plays for a top program out there in California, Lutheran. And, you know, Gary, they've never had he is the only freshman that's ever started a game.
Wow.
You know, he started as a freshman. So it tells you a little bit about his ability. Yeah, you talk about his size. We watched some video of him jumping some hurdles, standing flat-footed. It's pretty amazing with some of the athleticism that he has, the explosiveness, all of those things. He's one of the top, like you said, offensive linemen in the country. I think when you look at Alabama, we talked about when we started previewing some of these recruiting weekends coming up, we said the difference would be how does Alabama recruit in the trenches. And I think when you have Chris Booker committed on the offensive line, now you add Sam Utu, you've got some other kids that you're really working hard that have come in, Malachi Lee, for example, from Honolulu. This is a really big pickup, I think, when you start to look at it from a trenches standpoint.
All right, let's talk about some other prospects that were in over the weekend. A lot of excitement about Baltimore, Maryland, 5-star safety Jeriah Edwards, and a tweet that was put out with an elephant emoji by Bama staff member and analyst for the defensive backs, Kevon Coleman, got people kind of excited. But there's no doubt, I don't know for sure what Jeriah Edwards is going to do, but Alabama seems to be at the top of his list.
Alabama has done really well. I mean, Auburn's been in there, Georgia. There's a lot of schools that would love to have Jeriah Edwards. He's one of the top safeties in the country. Had a tremendous visit, obviously. Now, I don't know if he's going to shut down his remaining visits or not. He's supposed to announce on July 5th. Gary, that could happen before July 5th. There's some speculation that he might go ahead and pull the trigger. We'll see. But, I mean, the level at which Alabama is recruiting in the secondary, Mo Lindquist, those guys have done a fantastic job in that secondary. They already have the number 1 corner committed. They have another guy's top 5, Zion Gibson, who's one of the top 5 corners in this class, according to some. And now Jeriah Edwards is number 1, 2 safety, however you want to look at it. So they're doing a fantastic job in the secondary.
Yeah, DBU. All right, one of the highest-rated prospects that Alabama is recruiting is Gainesville, Georgia, 5-star linebacker Xavier Griffin, and all kinds of connections here. Now, listen, Ohio State is pushing hard. Other schools are as well. But his coach is Josh Niblett, former Alabama football player, former Hoover head coach, and his teammate is Jamarian Matthews, who transferred into Gainesville but is already committed to Alabama. So there's some good symmetry here for the Crimson Tide as far as Griffin is concerned.
Yeah, there's a lot of connections. I mean, he's originally from the state of Alabama. You know, Gary, he has family. I understand his grandfather lives not too far from here, works not too far from here. So a lot of connections to Alabama. Might be the number 1 linebacker in this class, depending on which service you kind of pay attention to. But he's a talented guy. Was originally committed to USC for almost a year. You mentioned Ohio State. He visited there a couple of weeks ago, had a great visit. But he's got Texas coming up. And, anytime Texas gets involved, you better be ready because they're certainly going to really ante it up out there.
Yeah, that's for sure. All right. Quarterback, obviously, is always a focus for folks that follow recruiting. Matt Ponatoski out of Cincinnati Moeller was in this past weekend. Now, he's a terrific quarterback, but, Rodney, he also might wind up being a really high pick in the Major League Baseball amateur draft. So you're not only recruiting against other schools for him at quarterback, but also knowing there's a possibility that he could sign a professional baseball contract.
And I think that's kind of where, you're walking a fine line a little bit. Now, he's a great player. I think he's a fantastic player. He was the State of Ohio Gatorade Player of the Year, both in football and baseball as a junior.
And that's a great state for high school.
Yeah, and he's projected as one of the top 25 to 30 potentially picks next year. So But again, I think when you look at him, Bama, Oregon, probably the leaders, although Arkansas and Kentucky are in there really strongly as well. But, we'll see what happens. They have another quarterback. Don't forget, we already talked about him, Jet Tamala. So I think one of those two could end up in this class.
All right. I'm not going to ask you about every prospect, but I want to ask you about the running back out of Hollywood, Florida, Derek Cooper, who I know Alabama likes a lot. I don't think they're necessarily the leader, but did they make up some ground over the weekend?
They had a really good visit. I mean, we talked to his mom, and she mentioned how they really liked everything. I mean, and basically every prospect that visited really loved the visit. So, but I would say this, Gary, yeah, I think they did certainly make an impression. Again, when you're talking about down there, Miami's going to be a real factor.
And real quickly, linebacker Kamari Brooks.
Well, now look, I know there's been a lot of positive things said about him, and he's from over in Georgia. I know he had a great visit. This would be a real coup if they could pull him off.
Georgia's going to be hard to beat.
Yeah.
All right, that's the recruiting update. Another visit weekend coming up this weekend, although not quite as big as the last two. All right, still to come on TITV. We're going to get to some phone calls, emails, and tweets. And again, phone lines are open, folks, so go ahead and give us a call at 205-348-9882. If you'd like to get through and talk with Rodney and me, you can do so. Just give us a ring and we'll get you through, and we'll be back with more on the show that takes you inside the Crimson Tide, the one, the only Tider Insider Television. Two incoming Alabama softball pitchers earned Gatorade Player of the Year recognition for their respective states. Vic Moten of Daphne wins the title for the second year in a row. All she did last year was go 23-4 with an 0.79 ERA and 238 strikeouts. And she batted .438 with 13 home runs and 36 runs driven in. As good as her pitching numbers are, Caitlin Palazzi out of the state of Michigan, Mercy High School there in Farmington Hills, just outside Detroit. How about this, Rod? 23-0 with an 0.14 ERA. I mean, she didn't give up anything. Big-time recruiting class coming in. And more Crimson Tide softball signee superlatives. Curry High School star Amory Taylor from just up the road in Walker County has been named the Alabama Sports Writers Association Miss Softball for 2025. The Alabama signee hit .597 with 34 doubles and 26 home runs as a senior, and she finished as the AHSAA's career doubles leader. She also helped Curry to the Class 4A state softball title in 2022, multiple trips to the state tournament, and a local product. This recruiting class for Alabama for softball is hot. All right, welcome back into TITV, and we do have some phone calls to get to. Braden is going to lead us off up in Northport. Hey, Braden.
Hey, guys. Thanks for taking my call. So with this new NIL legislation, where does that leave schools like Alabama who don't have state doesn't have a lottery in terms of how they fill out their scholarships for sports like baseball?
Yeah, it should help. First of all, you're going to be allowed more scholarships. The roster's going to increase. And, Alabama, because they don't have a lottery, and all the schools around them in the SEC for the most part do, just the idea of NIL from that regard probably helped a little bit. If a school was offering some lottery money in the past, there's not much Alabama could do to counter it, Rodney, but they could if they wanted to come up with some NIL money. Now, with scholarships expanding and roster money being made available from the university, I think it'll help Alabama.
Yeah, and I think, that's something that I know Alabama fans have been looking for, a little bit more balance there in terms of the competition that they face, that have had those opportunities to bring extra guys in.
All right, thank you, Braden, for that phone call. But Alabama baseball trending in the right direction. Just got to do something in the postseason, and I think next year they will. All right, let's go over to Romulus and talk to our buddy Tommy. Haven't heard from Tommy in a while. Hey, Tommy, what's up?
Yeah, well, you answered my first question. You must be reading my mind about the recruits to softball and other sports. Have we lost any more in the transfer portal in softball, or are we looking at anybody? Have you heard?
Well, they lost Valentine, the catcher, in the portal. I think for the most part right now it's been quiet both on the outgoing and the incoming. But as I said, Rodney, they got a great signing class coming in. So I think they're going to be trying to retain their roster, bring in these freshmen, and probably just cherry pick the portal. May not do too much.
Yeah. Well, and I think the thing that really stands out is you recap some of these incoming players is, Gary, not only are they bolstering the pitching, but they're bringing in some power. There's some we saw a lot of home run production there.
Yeah. Yeah, hey, listen, this is a great signing class. This is the kind of signing class that could come back up there with the Oklahoma and Texases and those bunch in the SEC. All right, still to come on Tider Insider Television. We are going to get to more of your phone calls, and we are going to have our email question of the day. Give us a call, 205-348-9882. We're going to be right back with more TITV right after this. The NCAA Track and Field Outdoor Championships will begin this week in Eugene, Oregon. Alabama will have 20 student athletes participating, 9 from the women's team, and 11 entries on the men's side. And Alabama is expected to do really, really well. Men's Day 1 action will start tomorrow with coverage on ESPN, so we'll be keeping an eye on that. And welcome back into TITV with Rodney Orr. I'm Gary Harris. Let's get to our email question of the day. And our email question of the day is brought to you by KDM Service Corporation. When it comes to heating and air conditioning, KDM Service Corporation serves your family like our family. Is there more pressure on coaches now to win than 30 years ago? That's from Matt in Tuscaloosa. Matt, I think that's an excellent question. And I don't know that there's an easy answer. I think there has always been pressure in the SEC for coaches to win across the board. Do I think there's more now? Probably. Just because I think with social media, I think with now NIL and the transfer portal, I think the patience level is just not what it once was, particularly when you're spending as much money as these schools are spending on these sports, Rodney. People want to win. And if they're not winning, there's going to be a lot of insistence on making a change.
You know, I think in football, Gary, specifically, I do think there's more pressure now because I think there's more expectations from schools that in the past, like you said, did have patience. I think there is more pressure for those teams to win and to win quickly. But at Alabama, I think the pressure's always been there.
Yeah, 30 years ago it was a lot different than it is now. Ask, Gene Stallings, Mike DeBoe, some of those folks.
Bill Curry.
Yeah, Bill Curry. All right, thanks for the phone calls and the emails. We're going to come back and wrap up this edition of TITV right after this.